On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a resident walking through a vacant lot in Leimert Park noticed a pale shape resting in the overgrown grass. It was the body of a young woman, severed completely at the waist. Investigators noted that the bisection was clean and methodical, suggesting the killer possessed specific anatomical knowledge rather than acting in a moment of chaotic violence. The clinical nature of the scene stood in sharp contrast to the polished image of 1940s Los Angeles. While the city marketed itself as a center of glamour, this lot held evidence of a highly organized surgical crime. In the years following World War II, Los Angeles drew thousands of hopeful transplants seeking work in the burgeoning film and aerospace industries. Elizabeth Short was one of them. Her path to California was marked by early hardship. Her father had faked his own suicide after his business failed in the Depression, and she spent much of her youth struggling with debilitating asthma that eventually required lung surgery. Contrary to later press reports, Elizabeth lived a transient and impoverished life in Hollywood. She often shared small rooms with multiple women, frequently moved to avoid rent collectors, and had no known acting credits to her name. Her documented timeline ends on January 9, 1947. A salesman named Robert Manley dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Witnesses reported seeing her using the lobby telephones that evening. Shortly after, she was seen getting into an unidentified car, marking the last time she was observed alive by anyone other than her killer. The 6 days that followed remain a blank space in the record. This gap in her life is what transformed a struggling 22-year-old into a subject of permanent speculation. The coroner's report detailed a series of precise mutilations, including a Blasco smile slashed from her mouth to her ears. The killer had also washed the body with gasoline, a technique used to remove fingerprints and trace evidence before the remains were posed in the lot. Identifying the victim was delayed by weather. Severe winter storms in Washington, D.C. meant that physical fingerprint cards could not be flown across the country for comparison against federal records. The LAPD attempted to transmit images of the prints over telegraph wires. As the source records show, these early digital transfers were blurry and unusable for a definitive match. Success only came when investigators sent enlarged photographs to the FBI. Analysts matched the prints to a civilian ID Elizabeth had filed while working at the Camp Cook Army Base in 1943. Once the name was confirmed, the news leaked. Reporters from competing papers swarmed the investigation, sometimes intercepting tips before the police could process them, effectively prioritizing headlines over the integrity of the crime scene. The scale of the search was significant, involving 750 investigators and the vetting of over 150 primary suspects. Police searched storm drains and abandoned buildings across Los Angeles, but the physical evidence remained sparse. The press interference grew increasingly invasive. Reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner called Elizabeth's mother and claimed her daughter had won a beauty contest to manipulate her into giving an interview, only informing her of the murder after they had the information they wanted. The investigation took a direct hit when the killer contacted the Examiner personally, mailing a manila envelope that had been cleaned with gasoline to remove prints. The package contained Elizabeth's birth certificate and a nightclub owner's address book. The killer had also included a note made of newspaper clippings, including a movie ad with the phrase, "Heaven is here." Days later, police found her handbag and a shoe in an alleyway, 2 miles from the original crime scene. Like the contents of the package, these items had been wiped clean with gasoline. These mailings changed the nature of the investigation. The killer was no longer just a figure in the shadows. They were now actively using the media to monitor and taunt the authorities. The names in the recovered address book gave police a starting point, leading to a long list of men who had crossed paths with Elizabeth in the months before her death. Robert Manley, the last person to see her alive, was the initial prime suspect. He was cleared after passing multiple polygraph examinations and providing a verified alibi for the time the body was disposed of. Mark Hansen, the owner of the address book, was also investigated. Although he had a motive of rejected advances and a connection to the mailed evidence, the LAPD eventually cleared him due to a lack of physical proof. Detectives then focused on Marvin Margolis, a student at the nearby USC Medical School. His surgical training aligned with the precise nature of the bisection, but he was eliminated when his wife provided an alibi for the night of the murder. One of the most persistent names in the files was Dr. George Hodel, As a physician, he had the skills to perform a hemicorporectomy, the specific medical technique used to sever the body, and he lived right within the area of the discovery. In 1949, a grand jury wiretap recorded Hodel stating, "Suppose a night did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead." Despite the recording and his surgical background, Hodel was never charged. The case against him only regained public attention decades later when his son, an LAPD detective, began a private investigation into his father's past. The official investigation eventually stalled as Hodel moved to the Philippines, and a series of false confessions from the public cluttered the police files. With no conviction, the case transitioned from a live homicide investigation into a piece of local folklore. The details of the crime remained in the public consciousness, kept alive by the lack of a clear resolution. For some, the story became literal. In the 1990s, a Biltmore Hotel employee reported riding an elevator with a silent woman dressed in black, who simply disappeared when the elevator doors opened, a sighting later linked in the popular imagination to Elizabeth Short. Elizabeth's final resting place is in Oakland, California. The site is a modest grave in a quiet cemetery, located hundreds of miles from the city where she sought her start. The case remains open because the facts remain contradictory. Elizabeth Short's life was defined by the struggle to find stability, while her death became a permanent fixture of a city that never provided it.